Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Hello, as you're all coming in through the waiting room. It's wonderful to see you all. For those of you that haven't met me before, my name's Amanda. I'm CEO and co-founder of the CPD Standards Office. And this is one of our regular webinar series that we run in order to try and support you, our trainers, coaches, and online educators as part of our CPD Standards coaching and training excellence community. So today's session we're really looking forward to. It's about B2B lead generation, and probably one of the most critical skills that you can develop for your business in order to make it sustainable, long-term and profitable. So I'm delighted that we've got Jessica Lorimer here with us today from Selling to Corporate. She's been a sales trainer for over 15 years and has been running her business for 8 years. She's based down in the New Forest and apparently has a dog called Max, the Chihuahua, who may snore loudly during the session. Selling to Corporate offer online and face-to-face training courses for sports, recruitment and other industries. And we're really going to be focusing today on lead generation for the training and coaching industries. So just a few housekeeping rules. We like to use the chat constructively throughout the webinar series. So if you have a comment, some feedback or a question, want to say hello, then absolutely please do put your comments in the chat. Please don't do any self-promotion or networking or drop your business or LinkedIn profile in there. We really want to see this as a CPD hour for you as an individual. And if you've got any queries or questions with regards to your membership or assessments, then my colleague Kirsty Walker is on hand here to answer those questions directly. So send her a direct message through the chat. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jess, and we're looking forward to this session enormously. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and excited to see lots of faces who hopefully are excited about B2B lead generation. It's not always the top topic that everybody has on their mind on a Tuesday, so I'm going to try and make it as interesting as I can. So one of the things that I always say about trainings with me is that they are relatively interactive. So please do use the chat function. And if you have any questions, I will come back to them at the end. So don't worry, pop them in the chat as we go along. And at the end, I know there's going to be some time for some Q&A as well, which I'm always excited about, and really just tests if people were listening or not. So that's always nice validation for me. All right. So let's get into it then. With B2B lead generation, we're going to be covering a few different things today. So what I want everybody to ultimately walk away with at the end of today's session is to understand whether or not your existing lead generation process for business-to-business sales is working. And if it isn't, being able to troubleshoot the points that are problematic for yourself, for your lead generation process, and then being able to spot ways that you can generate leads that are perhaps more productive for you. Now, along the way, I'll be sharing some of the trends and insights that have kind of occurred over the pandemic with regards to B2B lead generation. So you'll see some of the trends that have happened, and you'll also hear some of my insights about what is going to happen, so you can take those into account and factor them into your decisions as well. All right. Sound good for everybody? Nod, smile. Okay, perfect. So what do we struggle with when it comes to B2B lead generation? So what are some of the things, you can pop these in the chat, that actually cause problems for us when we're trying to generate leads for businesses? So what I'm talking about, if you're a coach or a consultant or a trainer, and you are trying to sell to corporate organizations, what are some of the things that you struggle with when it comes to approaching leads? Is it finding the right person to talk to? Is it how to approach them? What are some of the issues that come up? You can pop those in the chat for me. you're not interested as they've already got a provider. Yeah, getting past the gatekeeper, that's very common. Anything else? Getting to the real decision maker. Okay, perfect. So these are all really normal things. And actually, some of these are to do with the lead generation process, and some of them are to do with parts of the sales process. So we're going to talk about how that works throughout the course of today. But, you know, you typically will see lead generation obstacles that are related to one of these three things. Okay, so every single problem that you get with regards to lead generation is going to come from one or more of those three things on the screen in front of you. So, for example, if you are somebody who sends out a lot of LinkedIn messages, and you're sending them out to what you believe to be the right decision maker, but you consistently don't get any responses, or you consistently get responses that are, I'm not the right person for this, then it's most likely to be that you are trying to talk to the stakeholder who isn't responsible for your area of specialism. Okay, so sometimes we can pick the right job title, and we can, you know, pick who we believe to be the right person for us to talk to, but actually it turns out that they don't have budgetary responsibility for our area of specialism, or they don't have responsibility for making decisions around that area. So wrong stakeholder is a very, very common problem that people who are not necessarily lead generation experts will have when it comes to B2B lead gen. Okay, and there are simple ways to overcome that. You know, there are simple ways to start creating key identities and key stakeholder maps to help you make sure that you're targeting the right stakeholders within a business consistently. The second thing that we go wrong with most often, or that we see causing the most problem, is having the wrong messaging. So I don't know about anyone else here, but I was talking to Amanda about it before we started the session today. Has anyone had the kind of awkward LinkedIn messages of late, perhaps over the last 6 to 12 months, where you connect with somebody, they don't send you a connection request that explains why they want to connect, so it's just blank, and then as soon as you connect, you get some kind of pitch or some kind of message into your inbox that is inviting you to a Facebook group, or can you come and watch this training, or do you want to buy this thing? Has anyone else experienced that recently? I think it's one of those things that's becoming more and more common, if you haven't already, but I probably get about 25 or 30 a week. So it's quite a prevalent thing. And if I'm getting 25 or 30 a week, then our stakeholders absolutely, so our stakeholders, our decision makers in organizations, are also seeing this coming through. And having that messaging that isn't targeted or tailored to generating a conversation with a stakeholder means that a lot of people are missing out on generating the right lead, and they're also finding it quite difficult to get responses from stakeholders, and that's across any platform that you might be using for lead generation. Okay, so messaging is another core issue that we see. Okay, and then the final thing is I'm going to refer to it as metrics. So who here monitors their metrics? Let me know in the chat. Do you note down every month how many leads you're generating and how many follow-ups you might be sending to those leads? It's totally fine if you don't, but let me know in the chat who's already monitoring their metrics. Christian, good. Okay, perfect. Anyone else already monitoring their metrics, or are we finding that actually monitoring the metrics is a bit of a struggle? And a bit dull, because usually that is what we find. And that's with experienced salespeople as well, so don't worry. Bit of a struggle, totally understand. So metrics are one of those things that actually factor in really highly to somebody's success or degree of success with corporate lead generation. When I say corporate lead generation, we're talking about B2B, business to business lead gen. Okay, and the reason that most people don't monitor metrics is because actually monitoring their metrics can make them feel bad about the amount of activity that they've been able to do. Unfortunately, not monitoring metrics means that we're often making decisions on data that isn't accurate, or that we don't have. And when it comes to lead generation, that's problematic, because obviously if we aren't able to track what's happening, we can't really pinpoint where something is working and where it isn't working. And that usually leads to people who've identified that they've got an issue with B2B lead gen. Instead of just changing one thing or one aspect based on data, they try and change the whole thing. So they might try and change all of the stakeholder job titles that there's my dog. They might try and change all of the stakeholder job titles that they're approaching, or they might try and use a completely different platform for lead generation, and they might change their entire messaging sequence at the same time. And actually, in doing that, in throwing the baby out with the bathwater, you end up getting rid of some of the things that you might already be doing that are actually good and that actually have the potential to work. So metrics are a really key part of your lead generation process. And I promise you that as a sales trainer, having been a sales trainer for a very long time, if I could find a way to make tracking people's metrics more interesting or fun or motivate people to do it consistently, I would have made tens of millions of pounds. But unfortunately, everybody, experienced salespeople, inexperienced salespeople, salespeople working for big companies in big teams, and individuals on their own, all hate doing it. So it's not something that I can necessarily make more fun for you today, but I will tell you that measuring your metrics will really, really help you to not only generate more leads from corporate companies, but also make the entirety of your sales process a lot easier. All right. So if we understand where we're going a little bit wrong, we can then start to look at how we can change things. So based on this screen here, does anyone have an immediate idea of what might be causing a few issues in their lead generation process? Is anyone looking at this and thinking, okay, based on what's been said, perhaps I'm not targeting the correct stakeholder, or perhaps my messaging isn't really conveying that I want to have a conversation with them as the first point of contact? Okay, perfect. Christian, combination of 1 and 2. Thank you for being so honest. I know it's not always easy, but it does always help. Anyone else noticing things that maybe are causing the biggest obstacles for them? Feel free to let me know in the chat. And hopefully as we go along today, if you're able to identify the key areas that are going wrong, we can help you put them right. Okay. Andy, yeah. Jeremy, all 3. Well, don't worry, we'll have you covered, I promise. So if we know where we're going wrong, we have to know what we can change. And a big part of that is actually looking at making sure that you are setting up the right lead generation process for you to make you successful. And what is frustrating to me is that everybody will tell you that their way is best. Now, I'll be very honest, my best way for generating leads from corporate companies is cold calling. I love it. I'm anticipating also that everyone watching this hates cold calling. So if you do, please let me know in the chat, because it's always nice to know that I'm surrounded by people who dislike it intensely. But it's my favorite thing, and I'm really good at it because I don't mind calling a whole bunch of numbers a whole bunch of times and just talking to people and seeing if I can find out names and seeing if I can be put through to the right person. But a lot of my clients, I would say 97% of my clients, hate the idea of cold calling. It really stresses them out. They don't feel like they know what to say. They feel really awkward about approaching the gatekeeper. They don't know what's going to happen in that conversation, and that makes it really uncomfortable. And so that's why it's really important that whoever you're taking advice from, you're not buying into what their favorite thing is or what they happen to be really good at. You're setting a lead generation process that works for you and for your personality. And in the next couple of slides, I've got a few lead generation strategies that I'm going to highlight for you. But I would say that there are tons and tons of ways to generate corporate leads that don't have to be using LinkedIn. So if you hate LinkedIn, that's cool. You don't have to use it. If you think that the idea of cold calling is repulsive, you don't have to do that either. There are lots and lots of other ways to do it. But what we have to do is make sure that ultimately we're setting up a lead generation process that is going to work for us. And parts of that are, strategic. So parts of it are, what do we practically have time for in our diaries every week that we can make sure that we're then consistent with? And parts of it are personality driven. What do you actually like doing? What platforms do you actually like using? How do you like to communicate with people? Okay, does this make sense so far for everybody? So when we're talking about choosing the right lead generation process to set us up for success, we have to look for a few common factors to make it easy for us to make sure that we're creating a process that we're going to stick to. Because as we know, right, our metrics are going to be key. And so we want to make sure that we're setting up a process that's actually going to work for us, that's going to fit in the diary, and that we're going to obviously be consistent with. So we want something that's measurable. That's the first thing. When we're choosing any lead generation strategy, we're not choosing something based on the fact that this week it seems like a good idea and next week we might hate it or we might not be able to sustain it. We're choosing something that we can measure so that we can understand if there are going to be any problems. We can troubleshoot any areas that might have gaps. We can tweak anything that we see isn't working. We also want something, and part of it being measurable is something that's going to be predictable. So we can, over time, start to predict, if I take X amount of action, I'm going to be able to generate X amount of leads. And if I generate X amount of leads, I'm going to book X amount of sales calls, have X amount of proposals, and ultimately make X amount of revenue. And that's one of the things that I really like for my clients, because a lot of the time, especially if you've been coaching or consulting and selling primarily to individuals, it's really hard, unless you use paid traffic, to be able to create that predictable process. Whereas when we're selling B2B, when we're selling to corporate companies, we can directly measure input and output, and we can use that to predict forward activity. We can use it to forecast forward revenue, and that makes our lives really easy. Okay. We also want to make sure that we're choosing a lead generation process that is going to release some of the pressure on us, on our stakeholders, so we're building genuine relationships that are mutually beneficial and that we can leverage over time. Because there is no point, as nice as it is, having tons and tons of conversations with stakeholders that are nice, they're friendly, but that don't lead anywhere. Okay, so when we're talking about picking a lead generation process for us, we're very, very firmly sitting on the side of, we need to be super consistent with it. So we're not talking about taking massive action and then totally disappearing the next week because we figured out we don't like it or it's not sustainable. We're talking about a lead generation process that fits our personality type and the way that we like to communicate. And we're talking about picking a lead generation process that gives us that ability to build a solid relationship, a mutually beneficial relationship with a stakeholder. Okay. Now, when we look at how we're going to choose that, it then comes down to these things that we touched upon earlier. So what are we naturally good at? What do we actually enjoy? And what can we do consistently? Now, I talk about this all of the time, and I'm kind of obsessed with the world of B2B sales. So you'll have to forgive me because it's obviously something I'm really passionate about. And, one of the biggest things for me is that people will often say, but Jess, it seems so simple. And it is simple. But let's not confuse simple with easy. Let's not confuse simple with easy. Okay. Something being simple to implement doesn't necessarily mean that it feels easy to do or comfortable to do. And so that's where a lot of people tend to go wrong with B2B lead generation. They'll look for things that are marketed perhaps as being easy. And there's no easy way to generate leads. There are simple ways to generate leads. And one of the reasons that salespeople get paid a whole bunch of money is because they are not necessarily skilled at tons and tons of fancy things, but they're very, very good at being persistent and consistent. Okay. And that's why they're well paid. It's not because we have magical skills. I can assure you, as somebody who's been in sales for a very long time, outside of selling, I have very little. I'm never going to be a rocket scientist. I'm not going to work for NASA, but I'm very, very good at being persistent and consistent. And that's what we want to always be focusing on when we're looking at our sales process and our lead generation process. So what are some of the things, or what are some of the platforms that people really enjoy? Let me know in the chat. Do you enjoy using LinkedIn, for example, or do people enjoy email marketing, or are you guys the sort of people, I'm assuming you might be, who like to go to networking events or things like that? What sorts of things do you enjoy, and what sorts of things are you good at? What comes easily to you? Let me know. And Christian, just touching on your message in the chat, there, I've actually got a slide later on that gives you an outline of a first initial message. So I promise you we will get to that. But let me know in the chat, what are you guys naturally good at, and what do you enjoy about approaching leads? And it might be that you haven't found the right thing yet. It might be that you're just like, actually, Jess, I enjoy nothing about lead generation currently. And it might be that we experiment a little bit. So if it's we don't really know right now, LinkedIn, okay, email marketing. There we go. We don't really know right now. Lucky, I am going to share some of the things that my clients use. And so some of the top lead generation methods that my clients use and really like. Okay. Now, cold email marketing is huge. And it's been huge for, I don't know, 11, 12 years. In fact, when I first started working in recruitment, we still had fax machines. So let's say it's been working since the demise of the fax machine. Cold email marketing is great. It's a really good way to build relationships. And actually, we did a massive survey of stakeholders in companies over the last 6 months. And we produced a report that talked about the ways that stakeholders wanted to be approached. Now, 93% of stakeholders in our research said that they would prefer to be approached with cold email than any other method. 93%. So if you're not using cold email marketing, then it is quite likely that you might be experiencing some issues when it comes to lead generation. And it doesn't mean that other methods of lead generation aren't effective, but it is absolutely massive. Okay. And done well, I think that's the key thing. Done well, cold email marketing is a real boost to your B2B lead generation process. Now, the other things that my clients tend to use are obviously LinkedIn, and I can see Andy loves LinkedIn, and proactively targeting stakeholders on LinkedIn is really, really popular with clients of mine, but also some things that are a little bit outside the box. So I've got clients who are real chatty Cathys like me, and so they love things like networking for leads. And so they, might attend virtual or in-person events to generate corporate leads. I've also got clients who are just great at speaking. Perhaps they create motivational talks or instructional talks. And they're really, really good at speaking for leads. They will often go along to events or to conferences, and they'll speak, and they will pick up a lot of stakeholders who are really interested in talking to them. And then another one of my personal favorites, if I can't use cold calling, you'll probably see me creating some kind of roundtable. And a roundtable is where you bring together a group of stakeholders in an industry to talk about the future or change in that industry. And it's a really good way of generating leads and also being able to put research together. So if you're somebody who likes research, if you're somebody who is genuinely fascinated by your industry, then hosting a roundtable can be a really, really good way of getting to know stakeholders in the market and generate future leads with any research that you go ahead and provide. Is there anything there that has kind of stood out to people as being a little bit different or something that you might want to explore? Andy, yeah, personal referrals can be really, really helpful. Absolutely. And you can use, personal referrals as in friends, family, spouses, etc. But also you can use previous professional contacts. So anyone that you used to work for, if you worked for a company, anyone that, you know on a professional basis who's an existing client, those kinds of referrals are really, really excellent. Stat from cold email marketing. Yeah, it was super interesting. And I'm always around, like I said, it's Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions about it, then I have tons of things to say on cold email marketing. It's one of my faves. Roundtables are really good. They are really effective. And with regards to speaking for leads, you can absolutely do it both ways, online or face-to-face. Recorded wouldn't necessarily work as well for lead generation, purely because they wouldn't get to build that live relationship with you. But you can absolutely use online, so online like this sort of webinar scenario, or face-to-face, absolutely fine. Okay, so just take a second and think, okay, what's one method of lead generation that I might experiment with that might be a little bit different over the next 3 to 6 months? And if there's something like roundtables or speaking that you want to explore, you'll want 90 to 120 days to really settle into it, to experiment with it, to do it properly, and get the right data for you. Okay, now we also have to think about, if we're looking at what we're doing moving forward, is what our current lead generation focus is and whether or not it's working for us. So does anyone know how we can tell if our lead generation process is working or not? Does anyone know how we define whether a lead generation process is working or not? I know it's one of those questions that people sometimes think it's a trick, but it's really not. Engagement with the leads, that can be an indicator. What else? Results, yeah. So when we're looking at lead generation, and this is where sales and marketing get a little bit wonky. Sales and marketing teams often struggle to work together, even though they should be teams in an organization that have the most synergy, because sometimes they don't know where one team stops and the other team begins. And as a salesperson, I'll tell you that I love the entire end-to-end sales process. But as somebody who's got friends who work in marketing, I can tell you that there are some jobs that are very much marketing only. And that feeds into sometimes sometimes our perception of lead generation. So the job of lead generation is only to book sales calls. That's it. Okay. And actually, traditionally speaking, lead generation would sit with marketers, because it's their job to get the best quality leads. And once they go onto a sales call or enter into an active sales process, that's where sales starts. Okay. A lot of people, like myself included, I run a business, and my team, we don't split my team into sales and marketing. Everyone does the end-to-end life cycle. But when we look at it, a lot of the time people will judge lead generation on how many sales we make. And actually, that's not necessarily the job of lead generation. It helps, but it's not the job. The main purpose of it is to book sales calls. So if you are booking less than 5 sales calls a week with your current lead generation process, it is not working at its most effective for you. Now, I'm talking about 5 sales calls a week. That might seem like a lot for some of you, but I want to kind of explain why that is. So the average person with no sales training will close 1 in 4 sales opportunities. Okay, so if we're only getting 4 sales opportunities a month, we're most likely to close 1. If we are looking at making sure and guaranteeing that we're going to get that 1 and hopefully more, then we want to be aiming for 5 and above. And so my clients typically aim for 5 sales calls a week, because a lot of my clients want to make 4 sales a month. And a lot of our clients, tend to, once they've spent the first 3 months generating their 5 calls a week, they can then accurately predict how many sales calls they need to have in order to generate their revenue. And so sometimes you'll see people go, I only need 10 sales calls a month, or I only need 5 sales calls a month, and I'm going to close 3 of 5 because that's just how I work. But our lead generation process is what gets us to that point of being able to book consistent sales calls. So at the moment, if your lead generation process isn't giving you the amount of sales calls to generate the amount of sales that you need, then it's not working in the right way. That's fine. It's totally normal, but that's where it is. So hopefully that stat can kind of help some of you if you've been thinking that your sales are lower than you'd like. It could be a lead problem. It could be a sales process problem. All right. So we have to start moving forward with our lead generation process. And if we're going to look to make it better, the second part of this obviously is to make sure that our messaging works. So what do you think is important about our initial approach or the message that we would send to leads, prospective clients? What are the things that are going to be important? In an ideal world, we're looking to do these things. Okay, we're looking to set the right expectations. So we're looking to always make sure that prospects know how we are trying to build a relationship with them and what the expectations are from our side. Okay, so some of the time, when we get these kind of what we would refer to as pitchy or spammy sales messages on LinkedIn, it's because there was no expectation set. If you're sending blank connection requests and then somebody accepts and then you send them an immediate pitch, there was no expectation for them from their side on what you would do or how you would approach them. Whereas if we send a personalized connection request on LinkedIn and we set expectations around who we are, around why we want to connect with them, and what our next steps are likely to be, it makes it a lot easier for the prospect to decide whether or not they are the right person for you to engage with and whether or not they want to go ahead with that conversation. And so actually that makes it a lot less spammy for them. And it feels a lot better for them because you've been transparent from the beginning. Okay, and that's really, really important. When we talk about spammy or sleazy sales techniques, they feel that way because somebody wasn't transparent about what they wanted or upfront about how they were expecting to build the relationship. All right. And we want to set this right up from the beginning to make sure that right from the beginning of our end-to-end sales process, our stakeholder or prospective client feels reassured by the fact that we are honest, that we are transparent, and that we are ultimately demonstrating to them the kind of relationship that we want to build. Now, if you do this, if you send personalized LinkedIn connection requests and you are transparent and you do set expectations around what you want that relationship to look like moving forward, absolutely you will find that you'll get a lower acceptance connection rate. So I want to be super upfront about that. You will absolutely find that instead of getting, 50% who immediately click yes and accept your connection request, you'll see between 20 and 25%. That's what our clients see most often, 20 to 25% acceptance rate. But the upside of that is that what you then see is a higher conversion from lead to call. Okay, because obviously those people, once they've connected with you, have already acknowledged that they want to be in touch with you, that they are happy about the terms of the relationship that you're setting out, and that they, you know, are happy to kind of operate in a transparent way. And so what I want to show you is this typical message. This is the standard initial outreach message that all of my clients use. Okay, they all use this on LinkedIn. We have a slightly different version for cold email marketing because you're not hindered by characters on cold email. You can write as much as you want. Okay, so as you can see, this message is very short, it's concise, and it's very transparent. Okay, what else do we notice about this message? What are the key things that we notice about this and how it might be different to some of the other things that we see in our inboxes all the time? Let me know in the chat. And obviously you're more than welcome to screenshot that particular slide if you need to. Yeah, short and to the point. It's simple, it's honest, there's no pressure. Yeah, good. So it's all of those things, and it's assumptive. Okay, this bit here, when would be a good time to talk, that assumes that makes the assumption that if they connect with us from this message, that they're going to want to talk to us about what we have invited them to discuss in the message. All right, so if I was going to send this, I would say I specialize in helping sports firms to train sales teams in overcoming objections in a consultative way so that they can get more sales through the door in a way that feels good for clients. I'd love to talk to you about how company, their name obviously, is managing objection handling right now for your sales consultants. When would be a good time to talk? So if they accept my connection request based on that, they know exactly what I'm doing. They know how I help their organization. They know my area of specialism. They know specifically what outcome we can provide, all without pitching them, right? They also know that I'd be keen to have a discussion with them and that I'm probably going to follow that up because I've assumed my assumptive close, if you like, is when is a good time to talk. So if they connect with me on that basis, I know that they know who I am, what I do, what transformation I can provide, and that I'm going to follow up and want to talk to them. Okay, is this different to what some of you are sending at the moment? And it might be. Okay, and if it is, totally fine, but we're revamping, we're changing the game. Okay, and it leads us on to looking at the way that our process works from here. So as you can see from that message, it's very simple to send out. So you can actually send out a whole bunch if you wanted to. And you know, that means that the more we send, the more we're able to track our metrics from it. So it goes without saying that with your lead generation process, you are going to be required to follow up with leads. I don't know about you guys, but I get a whole bunch of emails every single week. And I love getting emails, but it does mean that I can't always clear down my inbox as quickly as I'd like. And so sometimes people have to send me a couple of emails to jog my memory on things or to remind me to do things because life gets in the way and our stakeholders are exactly the same. So with that initial messaging, yes, you absolutely want to be sending that out once, but you also want to be sending up to 3 follow-ups. Okay, so following up to 3 times on any lead generation process, just to make sure that they've got it and that they are able to go ahead and book that call with you. Okay, and that's going to help inform your metrics. So when we look at your metrics, these are the bits that obviously are going to help us to understand whether or not our lead generation process works. If it's not working, it's going to help to inform whereupon in the process it's struggling or where there's an obstacle. And it's also going to help us stop making a massive mistake with lead generation. Okay, so does anyone know what the worst thing that you can do with your lead generation that isn't performing? So what's the worst thing? If your lead generation process isn't performing, what is the worst possible thing that you could do? Yeah, exactly that, Keem. Continue. And that's the thing. So many people will do it and they'll, you know, bash their head up against a brick wall all day long doing exactly the same thing and expecting different results, which, as we know from Einstein, is the definition of insanity. It may not be Einstein. I may have completely paraphrased that from somebody else, but we know that continuing in the face of results that we already don't like is a useless endeavor. So when we're looking at our lead generation process and crafting our lead generation process, we also have to make sure that we're putting in place clear measurement and guidelines. So over the course of the last, 25 minutes or so, I've talked about certain stats. You know, if you are sending out tailored LinkedIn connection requests, you can expect to see 20 to 25% acceptance rate. We've talked about, how many times you need to be following up on a lead generation process to make sure that you've given it every opportunity to work. You will want to set your metrics over a period of time. So I would suggest 90 days to test it out and see if it's going to work. And in working, if we understand that the result that we're looking for from our lead generation process is to book sales calls, at the end of 90 days, if we haven't met our target for booking sales calls, we can then assess the process and we can see where it fell down. Okay, it could be that if we go all the way back to the beginning, it could be that wrong stakeholder. If we've had lots of responses that are, I'm not the right person for this, likely to be the wrong stakeholder. If it's 0 responses and 0 engagement, it's likely to be the wrong messaging, that we haven't talked about a transformation that is specific enough for them to be curious and be interested or to actually be having that problem at the moment and want to solve it. Okay, so we have to always look at our metrics. We have to give ourselves that time. Like I say, 90 days is when you're going to see a lead generation process be able to generate results, and you're going to want to set yourself targets. How many leads are you going to generate? How many follow-ups are you going to do? How many calls are you trying to book? And then at the end of that 90 days, you're assessing that process to see whether it worked. And if it did, great. And if it didn't, where can we tweak it? What one thing can we tweak to make it better before we throw the whole lot away and start again? Okay, that makes sense to everybody. So with that in mind, it should seem relatively simple, if not easy, right now to assess your lead generation process, where it currently is, whether it's performing, where you might need to make some changes, and ultimately some of the ways that you might want to experiment and try to implement a new lead generation process that's going to be most effective for you. Are there any questions from anyone on any of this? I'm going to flick us back to what I think is probably the most interesting slide, which is about how you can choose the lead generation process that's going to work for you. But obviously, if you have questions, please pop them in the chat. Let me know. How can I help?
Thanks, Jess. That was a really informative overview, and I think you've picked up on some really key points there. I'm glad you've bounced back to this slide because I wanted to pick up on roundtables. There were a few questions about that. Do you have any suggestions for how people, particularly coaches and trainers, can find relevant and appropriate roundtables to promote themselves in?
Yeah, so I would actually suggest hosting them yourself, and I've got lots of clients who are coaches and consultants in areas like diversity, equity and inclusion, who've hosted these successfully in storytelling. One of my clients recently got Netflix to come to their roundtable.
Oh, really?
Very cool. Yeah, it's awesome. And so a lot of my clients will regularly host roundtable events themselves, whether that's virtually or in person.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that you have more control over the process. You can set the hypothesis that you're trying to prove. My company, actually, we did one last year on the future of sales in the sports world. And so what we did was bring together 8 different stakeholders from companies like Celtic Football Club, the NFL. We brought together Middlesex Cricket, all of these kinds of companies to have a really honest and transparent chat about what sales looked like. And after we held the roundtable, we then created a report based on the information that we'd learned, and we were able to send that out to other clients and talk about the key areas that needed to change. So if you're thinking about roundtables, what you want to be thinking about is there a key insight that I want to prove, or is there a hypothesis that I want to prove, and actually bringing stakeholders from organizations together to discuss that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I love that. So taking the lead on it.
Yeah, because you generally work in a silo. If you're working in a company, you only hear what that company thinks or does or how they work. When you get to go to a roundtable with people from other companies, suddenly you hear different ways that they're approaching things, and actually it's really, really interesting for stakeholders, and it's a really great way for them to network amongst their peers as well. So they're really, really valuable, and you can get a lot of information about your market, about the trends and things that are happening. And also it's a great way to generate leads, because you're approaching people to invite them to your roundtable. You're able to put business development calls, before the roundtable happens, after the roundtable happens, and it works really nicely at positioning yourself with credibility and authority.
Yeah, and as a thought leader in many cases. Yeah, no, that's great. I thought it was really interesting when you showed us the sort of very brief but quite powerful message, but mentioned that you must follow up 3 times.
Yeah.
I know that some people would potentially look at following up more than 3 times. Do you think that becomes annoying, or do you think 3 is the absolute limit?
No, so the three time rule, I guess if we call it that, is about following up the same thing 3 times. So think about it this way: if someone approaches you and asks to have a conversation with you, and they follow that up 3 times, that's the limit for that, really. If you haven't responded or engaged with that person, that is about the polite limit that you would still consider having a chat with them.
Yeah.
If they continue going on and on and on about it, and you've already ignored it 4 times by that point, you're probably not going to go back to them. And at that point, what you want to do is be putting them onto a keep in touch cycle. So every month or so, you might get in touch with them about something else. You might share a key industry insight. You might share some stats. You might share some cool stuff that you've been doing in the market, or just generally build a relationship with them. But you're not harping on about book this call with me.
You're keeping it.
Does that make more sense?
Yeah. And those 3 contacts points, would you recommend them all taking place sort of like a week each after, or a few days? What's the time sort of lag that you'd recommend for that?
So I would say once a week to contact people.
Yeah.
You'll get other people who might tell you, oh, it's fine to send 2 or 3 messages a week, but realistically our inboxes move so quickly that actually you can miss messages quite easily. And so if somebody's approaching you 3 times in a week, that's quite a lot.
It's going to be quite intense.
Whereas if somebody's approaching you once a week and they're consistently courteous and they've got a consistent call to action, and they're not behaving in a kind of aggressive or aggrieved way about the fact that you've not been able to respond, you're going to be more likely, even if you don't get back to them within those 3 follow-up messages, to go back and say, oh, thanks for following up, or oh, I'm really sorry I wasn't able to get back to you. And that's what we see with my clients quite a lot. People worry so much about the follow-up and being a burden to people, or being invasive in the inbox. But actually, we had a story recently with a client of mine who had followed up with a contact for 14 months, and they'd sent every month, they'd sent a kind of message to contact them. And after 14 months, that person came back and said, I'm so sorry, I haven't got to this, we've been so busy, but now is the right time for us to have a chat, and booked a call. So if you're polite, if you're courteous, people aren't going to be worried about you following up, but you have to choose your follow-ups wisely.
Yeah, I see, and be consistent. Something I'd really like to get your opinion on. We had a session recently where we talked about digital marketing, and there was a discussion around, having a lead magnet, a download, some information on your website in return for an email address.
Yeah.
How do you think that sits in the lead generation process? And when people are trainers and coaches, what sort of lead magnets should they be producing?
So I would say, and I'm used to being a relatively unpopular opinion on this, but with B2B sales, it's not as necessary to have tons of content. And so lead magnets are part of that ecosystem. If you're selling to individuals, absolutely, having a lead magnet is key. Having something on your website that they can download, that then you have an automated follow-up process, email marketing, is absolutely key for building a relationship, being able to sell proactively or in an automated way. With B2B, because every company likes to feel that they're different, actually producing a lead magnet that they're going to use is a lot harder.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
And so they won't use it, and it becomes a bit of a waste of your time. What does perform quite well is if you write a report, or if you have, so say you hold a round table and then you create a report based on that.
So more like industry insights,
exactly.
more factual rather than a sort of a lead magnet that's a brochure.
Exactly. And companies like PwC and McKinsey have done this for years and years and years very successfully. And they don't necessarily look to make sales from the lead magnet itself. That's not what it's there for. It's just there as a credibility tool or an authority tool when we're looking at B2B. With lead generation for B2B, proactive lead generation, so approaching your leads directly, messaging them, getting them onto calls, that's going to be a lot quicker at turning into sales. It's going to be a lot more effective at building the relationship, and save a bunch of time. Like posting on social media is not something I'm good at or enjoy doing particularly, so it's one of those things that you don't have to spend tons of time promoting it. You can then go ahead and build the relationship.
Thank you. And just a last question from me. Sorry to pound you with queries, but we're always interested when we have an informative and an experienced speaker such as yourself. Are there any books, podcasts, webinars, or resources that you would recommend, that you see as a kind of Bible, that you would urge our trainers, coaches, and online educators to look at and digest?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the B2B world, it's strange because there aren't many of us that kind of produce resources on it. So I have a podcast on B2B sales that is widely listened to because I'm one of the very few people that trains B2B sales in the UK. So you could absolutely give something like that a listen. If you were looking at sales generally, weirdly there aren't many sales specific resources I would recommend. I would recommend books like Talk Triggers, for example, by Jay Baer, which is a great way to understand how customers are feeling and get more into the psychology behind why a customer might recommend or refer business. That's something a really, really underutilized sales tool that would be great. And so that's probably my go-to recommendation.
Okay, so that's Talk Triggers by Jay Baer, did you say? Yeah. And there's that BEAR.
I'll pop it in the chat for you.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
You'll know it because it's got llamas or alpacas or something on the front. It's in a bright pink hardback. And Jay is actually a really, really lovely guy. He works with a lot of corporate organizations like Hewlett-Packard and Microsoft and things like that. And has worked with some major companies around the world. So he uses some really good case studies in the book that are really interesting.
Okay, thank you. And just a final thought. If our community of sort of educators that we have here could do one thing today that would improve lead generation, what would you suggest? If they could just pick one thing, what would you urge somebody to do?
I always say to people that prior preparation prevents poor performance. And a lot of people go into lead generation and they'll just kind of smash the market and hope that it's going to work. If you could do one thing, I would prepare yourself to generate the best quality leads. So the leads who are going to be most interested in what you do and have budgetary responsibility for what you do. And that part is really underutilized, but will save you a lot of time. So going through and looking at the key job titles of stakeholders who've perhaps already bought from you, or who are most likely to buy from you and have the budget to do so, is going to give you the best ability to then go ahead and send them the messages, because that bit isn't perhaps as difficult, but choosing the right people is the one big difference that everybody could make today. And you know,
so it's doing that prep work and identifying those decision makers.
100%.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you ever so much, Jess. I don't know if anybody's got any final questions or comments that they'd like to put in the chat, but it's been really interesting to listen to different strategies for lead generation. Now, this is an area that I think most businesses struggle with in one way or another, and we've gained some great insights from you today. So I just wanted to say thank you for your time and your contribution. We will be sending the slides and the recording as a follow-up, and we wish you well for the rest of the day.
Thank you. It's been an absolute privilege.
Thank you very much. Okay, and we will be welcoming you again to another CPDSO webinar next month. So keep an eye in your inbox for the invite, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks ever so much, Jess. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to being in touch. Bye-bye.